My second birth in Egypt was meant to be ordinary, a child of no name, no legacy, no shadow stretching backward into the abyss of celestial war. Born to parents who knew nothing of fallen kings or weeping heavens, simple folk who named me for the river, for the sun, for anything other than the truth. For 7 years, I lived in blessed ignorance. 7 years of mortal lungs drawing mortal air. 7 years of believing, with every fiber of my small human heart, that I was merely human. I learned to walk, to speak, to laugh at the flight of birds and weep at the prick of thorns. I learned to forget. And then, he came, SaMael, the once archangel who now wore the face of Ra, sun god, king of kings, the golden tyrant of a kingdom rising from sand and blood. He found me as he had sworn he would. The mark Israel had carved into my soul, that dark tether, that thread of oblivion and rebirth, burned like a beacon, calling him across the dunes, across the years, across the lie of my peaceful childhood. I remember his shadow falling over me. I remember the weight of his gaze, ancient, patient, hungry, and I remember knowing, in that moment, that the game had begun in you. He took me to his palace of gold, spires that pierced the belly of heaven, halls where incense coiled like sleeping serpents and the echoes of future prayers already lingered. Aradia and Lu were already waiting, their second rebirth complete, their noble blood still fresh in their veins, their eyes holding the same depthless recognition I felt rising in my own chest. They knew me, and I knew nothing. For me, centuries had stretched between lives. My lineage had faded into dust. The names of my fathers, my mothers, myself, all scattered like ashes on a wind that no longer remembered which way to blow. So SaMael wove my mortal parents into his tapestry of power, gifting them titles they could never understand, raising them from peasants to priests, from dust to dynasty. They never knew why. They only knew that the sun god had smiled upon their son. The unraveling. I grew beneath his watch, my every step shadowed by memories not of this life, but the last, and the ones before that, and the ones before those. Fragments at first, the glint of a sword I had never held, the echo of a laugh I had never spoken, the phantom ache of wings I had never worn. Then sharper, a language rising unbidden to my tongue. A name, Aradia, falling from my lips before I knew its meaning. She smiled when I said it, and the world tilted. I trained my hands to wield weapons my soul already knew. The balance of a blade, the whisper of a bowstring, the weight of a father's sword that had not yet been reforged for this life. My body remembered what my mind had buried, muscle and bone shaped by wars that had ended before Egypt's first stone was laid. I whispered spells my tongue had spoken when the world was younger, when continents were still finding their shapes, when the stars leaned closer to listen. The words tasted of smoke and seawater, of falling empires and rising hopes. SaMael watched, and he waited. At the age of 21, when the Nile had flooded and receded 21 times, when my mortal body had reached the peak of its borrowed strength, SaMael awoke the curse inside me once more. Not gently, never gently. The pain was exquisite. My veins blackened first, spreading from my heart like ink dropped into water, branching across my chest, my throat, my face. Then my bones, cracking, reshaping, remembering, as though my skeleton had been folded into shapes it was never meant to hold. I fell to my knees in his golden hall, my screams swallowed by the incense and the silence. But this time, I did not become the beast. I became something worse, a hybrid of man and monster, designed, engineered. SaMael's daughters wove their gold-light magic into the curse's dark thread, and where once there had been only destruction, there was now balance. My eyes held the yellow fire, but my mind remained my own. My veins burned blue and black and gold, but my heart still beat in my chest. I rose from the floor, and for the first time in 1,000 years, I smiled. Now I could read the tablets without shattering. Now I could walk the razor's edge between control and chaos, the beast sleeping beneath my skin, no longer a jailer but a tool, a weapon I could draw and sheathe at will. The knowledge of Marduk flowed through me like water through a channel carved for its pleasure. secrets of stars and souls, of rebirth and ruin, of the threads that bind one life to the next. And so, for another lifetime, I served. A scholar, a warrior, a scribe of the divine pretending to be a god. And always, a pawn in a war that had begun before the Nile first flowed, before the first drop of rain fell on the first seed, before the word time meant anything at all. In this life, something shifted between SaMael and me. The wary distance of mentor and student, that careful architecture of power and submission, slowly gave way to something else. Something warmer. Something that had no name in any language I knew, because no language had ever needed it before. A fallen archangel and a cursed Nephilim, bound not by chains but by curiosity, by the slow, reluctant recognition of one exile meeting another. As we pored over the ancient Anunnaki tablets together, bathed in the flickering torchlight of his inner sanctum, the shadows dancing like the ghosts of dead stars, I came to understand why he had chased my soul across lifetimes. Why he had bound me. Why he had saved me. The knowledge contained within those celestial stones was beyond priceless. It was dangerous. The tablet spoke of pyramids not as mere monuments, not as tombs for mortal kings or temples for borrowed gods. They spoke of living machines, hulking geometries of stone and crystal, humming with star-born energy, their angles designed not by human hands but by necessity. Their surfaces mapped the very fabric of space-time itself, blueprints unchanged since the days when my uncles Marduk and Enki strode these lands and whispered secrets into the ears of sleeping worlds. My fingers traced the swirling patterns. Wormholes, portals, gateways torn between here and there. They led to Maisha, the Anunnaki home system, where Nibiru hung like a jewel in the cosmic dark. A world of golden spires and silver seas, of dragons sleeping in the heart of suns, of a people who had forgotten how to die. Yet SaMael's eyes always lingered longest on the references to Zaraira, my father's lost dominion, the realm that had fallen when Atlantis sank, the realm my mother had tried to save, the realm whose name I had not spoken aloud in 1,000 years. His expression was unreadable, but his silence told me everything. He wanted it, not for me, for us. Night after night, we wrestled meaning from the celestial script. The words fought back. They always fought back, twisting, coiling, hiding their truths in layers of metaphor and mathematics. But I had been born for this. The curse that had shattered my body had also opened my mind. The more I translated, the more we uncovered about my kind's dominion over the stars, about the wars we had won, the worlds we had shaped, the empires we had let crumble to dust. In time, SaMael began revealing truths about his own lineage. How his father, Adonai, had kept all other gods in secret, locking them in cages of forgotten scripture, erasing their names from the mouths of worshippers until he alone stood as sole creator. How heaven had become a gilded prison, the choirs singing obedience, the thrones arranged for comfort rather than purpose, the light growing dimmer with each passing age. How the archangel host had fractured into warring factions, brother against brother, sword against sword, until the rebellion had torn the heavens asunder and cast SaMael down like a burning star. His voice would grow tight speaking of his fall. I watched his fingers trace, unconsciously, the strange key he always carried, a relic of bone and starlight, warm to the touch, hungry for something I could not name. He refused to discuss it, just as he deflected every question about the origin of his golden light. That light, so eerily reminiscent of my mother's magic, yet scorched with something darker, burned with something that had been forged in rage rather than love. My sanctuary in those days was Aradia. When the weight of celestial secrets grew too heavy, when the tablets whispered in my dreams and the curse stirred in my blood, I would find her under the stars. She would be waiting, as though she always knew when I needed her. Her emerald eyes alight with questions about the old world, about the places I had seen, about the people I had loved and loved again. She drank in my stories of the dragon magic of Nibiru, her fingers tracing the ancient sigils in the sand with unnatural precision for one so young, as though she remembered them, as though they had been carved into her bones before she was born. There was a hunger in her that mirrored my own, a restlessness, a yearning for something she could not name. Watching her practice the old spells, her hands weaving patterns that should have taken decades to learn, her voice speaking words that should have cracked her mortal throat, I saw glimpses of what she might become. What she would become. A bridge between worlds. A blade forged in the fire of two bloodlines. A woman who would one day choose her own fate and damn the consequences. Then came the fateful day SaMael deemed me ready. We stood atop the palace towers overlooking the fledgling kingdom that would one day be called Egypt. The sun bled gold across the horizon, painting the world in hues of fire and amber. Below us, mortals moved like ants, building, praying, hoping, unaware that gods watched from the shadows. The time has come, SaMael said. His golden eyes studied my cursed form. The obsidian skin, the veins pulsing with stolen light. The yellow fire that flickered behind my irises, never extinguished, never fully tamed. But mortals cannot worship what frightens them. They need symbols, masks. I understood. He was not asking me to hide. He was asking me to become. What face will you show the world? The question hung in the air like a blade suspended by thread. And then, unbidden, the name rose from some deep well of memory. A place I had not visited since Atlantis still stood. Since my mother still smiled. Since the world had been young. Thoth, the scholar of the drowned kingdom. The keeper of doomed knowledge. The last scribe of a world that had sunk beneath the waves, taking its secrets, its wonders, its sins into the crushing dark. I spoke the name aloud, and SaMael smiled. The black ibis mask was fitted to my face. Cold, ancient, right. As the metal kissed my skin, as the eye holes aligned with my burning gaze, I felt the weight of destiny settle upon my shoulders. Not as a burden, as a cloak. But this time, I did not face it alone. In SaMael, I had found an unlikely brother, a mentor who had once been my jailer, now my ally. A fellow exile, rewriting his fate with stolen knowledge and borrowed time. In Aradia, I had found a kindred spirit, a woman who saw beyond the monster to the man beneath, who touched my cursed skin without flinching, who stayed when every angel in heaven would have fled. And so Thoth was born, not as a lie, as a promise, a bridge between what was and what might yet be, between the drowned world and the rising one, between the old gods and the new, the first true alliance between our kind since the stars were young. And somewhere, in the depths of the afterlife, Zeren laughed, because the game had just become far more interesting. I walked the sun-baked streets of Memphis. My black ibis mask glinted in the harsh light, a shard of midnight carved into the shape of a bird, catching the golden fire of Ra's domain and throwing it back as something darker, something wiser. The whispers of the people rose around me like temple incense, curling through the heat, settling into the cracks of my borrowed skin. Thoth, they called me that now. God of wisdom, keeper of secrets, scribe of the divine, the one who measured time and weighed words and stood at the right hand of the sun itself. The weight of the title settled into my bones as I moved through the crowds beside SaMael, or as the people knew him, Ra, the blazing sun incarnate, the golden tyrant who had pulled a kingdom from the dust with his own scorched hands. Together we watched the miracle unfold, the slow, painful birth of civilization from the ashes of nothing. Where once there had been only scattered tribes, scrounging for survival, huddled in caves, painting their hopes on stone walls with the blood of beasts, now rose the first true city of man. Memphis spread before us like a dream given form, its white walls catching the light, its streets laid with purpose, its people moving not as prey but as builders. The new generation, not the hardy Neanderthal stock of old, those ancient cousins who had taught themselves to endure when the world was cold and hungry, nor yet the fragile children of pure Adamic blood, too soft, too new, too close to the garden's echo. Something greater, something that had never walked the earth before. The mingling of bloodlines had wrought a marvel. Minds sharp as flint, spirits unbroken as the desert stones. I observed them, these strange new humans. Their eyes held the ancient resilience of the old earth, that deep knowing that came from hunting beneath Ice Age moons. Yet they burned with a new fire, the fire of understanding, of curiosity, of the terrible and beautiful need to know why. They built where their ancestors had only scavenged. They questioned where others had merely endured. In their veins flowed both the stubborn strength of the first children of Earth and the celestial spark of Eden's exiles. The best and worst of two worlds, knitted together by forces they would never understand. And SaMael, Ra, had given them the spark that set it all ablaze. His fingers tightened around the crook and flail of his office as we passed through the market square. The symbols of his earthly power, shepherd and punisher, giver of grain and taker of breath, gleamed with gold that had been mined by mortal hands but blessed by immortal will. "Do you see it?" he murmured. His voice was thick with something I had never heard from him before, something perilously close to pride. "What we have wrought." I followed his gaze across the square. The potter's wheel spun where once there had been only hand-shaped clay, a whirling blur of creation that turned mud into vessel, earth into art. The first crude symbols scratched into tablets, the birth pangs of writing, marks that would one day become words that would one day become truths. The gleam of copper tools flashing in the sun where stone had once ruled supreme. Metal pulled from the earth's dark womb and taught to serve. This was no longer merely survival. This was empire. I turned to look at him, this fallen archangel, this rebel king, this creature who had burned his own heaven for the chance to build something new. His golden eyes swept across the city with an expression I recognized because I had seen it in my own reflection. Longing, not for what he had lost, for what he was finally creating. And so the civilization rose, not from dust, but from divine will. Memphis bloomed like a lotus from the Nile's rich silt, its petals unfolding in concentric rings of stone and song. A city built not only for mortals, but in sacred honor of his daughters, Aradia and Lu, whom the people now worshipped as Bastet and Sekhmet. The gentle and the fierce, the protector and the destroyer, two faces of the same divine feminine, watching over the kingdom with eyes that had seen the fall of angels. Temples of breathtaking scale pierced the sky, their pillars carved with stories not yet lived, their walls painted with prophecies not yet spoken. Their architects were human hands guided by inhuman vision, each stone laid with precision that bordered on obsession. Along the river's fertile banks, life thrived. Gardens spilled over with fruit that had been coaxed from foreign soils. Markets hummed with the voices of a dozen tribes, their languages beginning to merge into something new. Sanctuaries echoed with the harmony of human ambition and celestial design, prayers rising like smoke, offerings bleeding into altars, the slow accumulation of faith. It was Sumeria reborn, yet fundamentally transformed. Not merely the grandeur of the Anunnaki, those old gods of my father's generation, who had shaped worlds with their hands and demanded worship as their due. No, this was something other, infused not only with the memory of Nibiru's spires, but etched with the light and order of angels. The geometry of heaven, pressed into the clay of earth. Perfection lived in every corridor, every column, every whispered prayer beneath the stars. The people worked, they built, they believed, and in their believing, they gave SaMael something he had not possessed since the fall. Purpose. And beneath the watchful eyes of gods and men, we began the Great Pyramid. I stood on the scaffolding as the first stone was laid, my ibis mask cold against my face, my cursed blood singing with the knowledge of what we were building. Not a tomb, not a monument, a machine, a key, a door set in the stone of the world, waiting for the lock to turn. The tablets had shown me the plans, geometries that should not exist, angles that bent light and time, chambers designed not for the dead but for the awakening. The pyramid would not simply rest on the earth. It would anchor it. SaMael stood beside me, his golden light bleeding into the sunset, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the last sliver of Ra's chariot dipped below the world. When it is finished, he said, they will call it a wonder, a grave for a king, a mystery for the ages. His smile was sharp as a blade. They will never know what it truly is. And I, Thoth, scribe of the divine, keeper of secrets too terrible to speak, said nothing, because he was right. The world would look at the Great Pyramid and see only stone. But we would look at it and see the future. And so I drew the designs. From the celestial texts of Enki, my uncle, the Lord of Wisdom, the serpent who had whispered the first secrets into the ears of waking men. I translated the sacred geometry, the alignment with the eternal stars, the very essence of dimensional passage. Every angle was a prayer. Every stone was a syllable. Every measure was a verse in a hymn to the void, a song sung not with voice, but with mass. The ancient blueprints unfolded across papyrus beneath my hands, hieroglyphs bleeding from my fingers like prophecy. I placed them in SaMael's hands, a key to realms beyond mortal sight, a map to places that had no names because no tongue had ever returned to speak them. He did not hesitate. With a will forged in divine fire, with the same fury that had once made him raise his sword against the throne of heaven itself, he commanded the construction of the Great Pyramid. Thousands of hands, decades of labor, stone dragged from quarries that seemed to weep when their blocks were torn free, ramps and levers and ropes that groaned under weights that should have crushed them. And above it all, SaMael's golden light, burning like a second sun, driving the work forward when mortal flesh failed. This was no tomb, no monument to vanity, no grave for a king who feared the dark. It was a gateway, a machine of unimaginable scale, built to tear open the fabric of reality itself. Its chambers were not for the dead, they were for the travelers. Its shafts were not for ventilation, they were for the stars. Its geometry was not an accident of engineering. It was a surgical incision in the skin of the world. I had believed his aim was heaven, a triumphant return to the kingdom he defied, a conqueror's march through the gates that had slammed shut behind him, an angel's revenge, dressed in stone and starlight. But his eyes held a deeper hunger. I saw it in the way he traced the tablets, in the way his voice would falter when he spoke of certain names, in the way he stood alone on the pyramid's peak at midnight, staring not at the heavens above, but at something beyond them. He was not searching for a throne. He was searching for someone. Yet I would not live to see it completed. Years turned like pages in a forgotten book, each one a word, each decade a sentence, each lifetime a chapter that I was too tired to finish. My body, weary and worn from centuries of borrowed breath and stolen time, finally surrendered. The curse that had been my cage and my weapon quieted, as though even the beast within knew that this body had reached its end. I died not in battle, not in glory, but in a small chamber beneath the half-finished pyramid, surrounded by scrolls and star charts, my hand still resting on the final translation. The last stone had not yet been laid. The gate had not yet been opened. And I, Thoth, scribe of the divine, keeper of secrets too terrible to name, closed my eyes for the last time. As my soul slipped its mortal shell, Zeren was there, a silhouette against the endless twilight, taller than I remembered, darker than the space between heartbeats. His presence was both grim and familiar, like an old argument that had become a comfort. The chains of eternity clinked softly as he moved, each link forged from a life he had guided home. You depart just as the work reaches its zenith, he intoned. His voice was the echo of closing tombs, the whisper of the last page turning, the sigh of a door swinging shut on a room that would never be entered again. A lifetime of labor, and you will not see the gate open. I smiled, a faint, knowing curve in the void. Do not fret, old friend. My voice was already fading, already becoming echo, already beginning to unravel into the dark between worlds. We have many lives yet to live. Zeren regarded me. The hollows of his eyes held something I had rarely seen there, something that might have been pity or respect, or the ancient weariness of one who had watched empires rise and fall and could no longer tell the difference. Thoth again, he asked. Thoth again, I confirmed. And as he drew me toward the wheel of rebirth, as the darkness began to fold around me like a mother's arms, like a tomb's embrace, like the first and last silence, I glimpsed her. Aradia, a flash of emerald in the gloom. Her soul, bright as a burning city, cradled in Israel's somber grasp. The silent angel held her as though she were made of glass, or maybe as though he were, and she was the only warmth he had felt since the fall of heaven. Though worlds and dimensions yawned between us, though the wheel was already turning, already spinning me toward a new womb, a new name, a new forgetting, the bond held fast. A thread of destiny not even death could sever, not even the void could dissolve, not even Elohim himself could unmake. I reached for her, or perhaps she reached for me. Perhaps we reached for each other across the abyss, two souls who had loved and lost and refused to let go. And then, the darkness took me. Warm, total, complete. The cycle turned once more. And somewhere, in the half-finished pyramid, the last stone waited for hands that would not come for centuries. But the gate? The gate was patient. It had been waiting since before time began. It could wait a little longer.